One fascinating yet little known fact about the history of humanity is that our origin, inception, progression, and proliferation was dependent on the African Pygmy. Millenniums ago, before the first dynasty of ancient Kemet, before the construction of the Great Pyramids and Sphinx, and a time reaching back to the pre-dynastic period, and even earlier, going back countless ages into the Neolithic era, the Stone Age, and even further back to the very dawn of humanity, the African Pygmy tribes were appointed by nature to reign as vicegerents over the planet Earth. Scientific genetic studies have shown that the African Pygmy tribes have the oldest living DNA on the planet Earth, namely the San, Twa, Mbuti, Aka, and Bayaka tribes of southern and central Africa. Moreover, as it is discussed in the book The Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man by Albert Churchward, the Africoid Pygmies traveled all over the planet. The Pygmy tribes called Negrito, namely the Ati, Andamanese, Seman, Maniq, Aeta, and Koro-pok-guru were the progenitors of the people in Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, India, and Japan. The Africoid Pygmy tribes were also sailors and navigators who traveled to the islands of New Guinea and Australia as the predecessors of people in that region. Back on the African continent, the Dogon tribe of Mali tells stories of small red-skinned Pygmies called the Tellem, who were the first to live and settle in the area. The Tellem Pygmy tribe built their dwellings high up on the sides of cliffs and on the tops of mountains, and the remains can still be seen to this day. It is believed by the Dogon tribe that the Tellem must have been arrow Pygmies, gifted with the ability to fly in order to reach their dwellings built high up on the mountains and cliffs. What we can surmise about the philosophy of the African Pygmies is that it was a philosophy which held a deep and profound respect for nature. As a means to ensure their survival, the African Pygmies would have to observe nature in order to gain knowledge of nature, understand nature, and then make practical use of the knowledge for their survival and well-being. Based on this process, the nature philosophy of the African Pygmy could be considered a spiritual science or a scientific form of spirituality. The African Pygmies had the ability to craft and create any tool or technology they needed for their survival and well-being. Oral tradition amongst the Pygmy tribes of the Congo says that in ancient times, the Pygmies became so highly technologically advanced that they almost destroyed the entire forest. But the Pygmies realized that they needed the forest for their own survival, so they decided that the highest form of technology, the highest form of wisdom, would be to learn how to live in tune with nature and the forest. And thus, they have lived what people see as a primitive life in the forest by choice ever since. They say, our society will die if the forest dies. When the anthropology of religious evolution and development is studied, we find that animism was the first and earliest spiritual system in the world. In many animist traditions, the ancestors are honored and revered, and as animism gave way to polytheism, the ancestors also became deified, and thus, the progression from African Pygmy ancestors to African Pygmy gods. African Pygmies were present in Kemet, or ancient Egypt, since the very beginning of the first dynasty, as can be seen on Namir's palette. In the ancient Egyptian language Medu Neter, the word for pygmy or dwarf was Deneg. African Pygmies or Deneg were also noblemen, craftsmen, and entertainers in ancient Kemetic culture, as is evident from the statues of Khnumhotep from the 5th dynasty and Seneb, a court official who lived during the 6th dynasty. There were also several ancient Kemetic deities, or Neter, who were Deneg or pygmy dwarves. The ancient Egyptian deity Bes was seen as a protector of households, mothers, and children. The ancient Egyptian Neter Ptah was a deity of creation, craftsmen, and technology. There was also the ancient Egyptian deity Pataeke, who was seen as a younger form of Ptah, who was a synthesis of the deities Ptah, Sokar, and Asar, symbolic of creation, stability, and death. There were also the 7 dwarves, or 7 pygmy sons of Ptah, called the Khnemu. Pygmy dwarves also show up in African culture and mythology as both helpers and tricksters throughout the African continent. In the book of Water and Spirit by Malidoma Patrice Sommet, he speaks of magical dwarves known as Kontomble to the Dagara people of Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, and Ghana in West Africa. The Kontomble are said to live in the forest and have the ability to appear and disappear and have immense healing abilities. The Akan people of Ghana also tell stories of similar magical dwarves who they refer to as Mmortia. The Bois people of Burkina Faso tell stories of an ancient dwarf ancestor named Luruya who lived in the wilderness and had the ability to speak with animals. In the Congo, they tell stories of dwarves they call Ogriwabibikwa who have the ability to shapeshift into reptiles. Perhaps the stories of the craftsmanship, technology, and command and control of nature that the African Pygmy dwarves had in antiquity have turned into folklore tales about magical goblins, fairies, pixies, sprites, hobbits, leprechauns, and elves, which have spread to the 4 corners of the earth. Who knew that such small people would have such a big impact on humanity?